Hello, welcome to our presentation on UML sequence diagram. My name is Roshan Richardson. I'll be working with Jim on this presentation tonight. So what is a UML or what is a UML sequence diagram? A UML is a general purpose developmental modeling language in the field of software engineering. And a sequence diagram is an interaction diagram that details how operations are carried out. When it comes to these sequence diagrams, they fall under an interactive diagram, which falls under a behavioral diagram. They capture the interaction that take place in a collaboration that either realizes a use case or an operation. In other words, a high-level interaction between users of a system and the system, between the system and other systems, or between subsystems. From experience, the benefit outweighs the cost in making sure your software project has a sequence diagram to follow. As I'm building an insurance software for a client, I have found that my lack of experience in insurance was becoming a challenge. But I needed to understand how the client currently does things. Using a sequence diagram, I am able to understand the order of the messages or processes that need to take place before, during, and after each step. This has helped me to turn their manual system into an automated solution. So, just like in that example, we can see how a sequence diagram can be used in a real-world application or system. Some of the other benefits that a sequence diagram has: it's easier to maintain, it's easy to generate, and it allows reverse and forward engineering. There are a few drawbacks, of course, to a sequence diagram like any other system. Some of those drawbacks are there may be too many lifelines. The system becomes complex because of that. And this often happens in large projects. If you change the order of how a message is sent in each step, you got to make sure that you make changes as well throughout the system. Otherwise, you may get an incorrect response or result. Each sequence needs to be represented using different message notations, which can be complex, and the type of message decides the type of sequence inside the diagram.
So after all, we were going to look at the sequence diagram notation. So a sequence diagram is a structure, and it also is made up with several lifeline notation that should be arranged horizontally across the top of the diagram. In the next few pages, we will show some elements that we use in the diagram. So here is what we need to know. So no two lifeline notations should over each other, and then they represent the different objects or parts of the interact with each others in a system during the sequence. All right, so here's some virtual part of the sequential diagram. So the first image is the object. So as we mentioned before, and the beginning object, it must arrange horizontally across the top of the diagram. And then the second is called an actor element. So an actor element in the UML diagram represents a type of role where it interacted with the system and then it is object. It is important to note here that an actor is always outside of the scope of the system. We aim to module using the UML diagram. So for example, here is a user in the seat reservation system is showing as an actor where it exists outside of the system and is not a part of the system. So the next element is the entity elements. So the entity element is representing any system data. So for example, in a customer service application, the customer entity will manage all the data related to the customer. And the next is the boundary elements. The boundary elements is indicate a system boundary software element in a system. So for example, the user interface screen, the database gateway, your browser windows, or your menu that user interact with. So they are the boundary. All right, the next is control element. So the control element indicate a control entity or manager. So it is organized and scheduled the interaction between the boundary and the entity, and serve as the mediator between them. So after all the elements that we need to talk about the activation bar. So activation bar is the box placed on the lifeline. So the size of the activation bar, it depends on the object staying active, how long the object staying active. If the object works longer, the length of the rectangle is getting bigger. So in the sequence diagram, an interaction between two objects occurs when one object sends a message to another. Okay, now let's talk about the message arrow in the sequence diagram. So an arrow from the message caller to the message receiver specifies a message in the sequence diagram. So we need to know like a message can flow in any direction from left to right or right to left or back to the message itself. Now there's a few different message arrow. The first one is a synchronized message. Synchronized message is using when the sender waits for the receiver to process the message and then return before carry on with another message. And the second one is asynchronized message is used when the message caller does not wait for the receiver to process the message and then return before sending other message to another object within the system. Return message. A return message is used to indicate that the message receiver is done processing the message and is returning control over to the message caller. And return the message are optional pieces. So every asynchronous message always implied a return message. The next one is participant creation message. So objects do not necessarily live for an entire duration of a sequence of event, and the drop participant box notations can be used when you need to show that the particular participant did not exist until the created call was sent. So when a participant is no longer in need, we will put an X on the diagram to show that the participant is no longer in need for the system. So the next one is the reflexive message. So when an object sends a message to itself, it is called a reflexive message. It is indicated with a message arrow that starts and ends at the same lifeline. So finally, we have a comment in the UML diagram. So UML diagram generally permit the annotations of comments in the OURL diagram type, and the comment type, that comment object is a rectangle with a flow over corner. Okay, that's all we have. So in summary, UML sequence diagram are interaction diagrams that details how operations are carried out. They captures the interaction between objects in the context of the collaboration. Sequence diagrams are time-focused and they show the orders of the interaction visually by using the vertical axis of the diagram to represent the time one message are sent and when. Thank you for watching.